It was 5:30 a.m. when the alarm buzzed in David Miller's small apartment in Queens. He silenced it quickly, not wanting the sound to wake his daughter. Emma was only 8, still curled beneath her blanket with her favorite stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm. David rubbed his eyes, pulled on a faded t-shirt, and moved quietly into the kitchen. The fridge was nearly empty, but he managed to put together scrambled eggs and toast. He placed the plate in front of Emma's spot at the table, then packed a small lunchbox with a peanut butter sandwich and an apple. He checked the clock again. 6:15 a.m. Time always seemed to slip too quickly in the mornings. David's routine never changed. After making sure Emma brushed her teeth and packed her homework, he walked her to the neighbor's apartment. Mrs. Alvarez, a retired nurse, often helped watch Emma before school when David had to start early. He thanked her with a tired smile, then hurried to catch the subway into Manhattan. By 7:30 a.m. he was already in uniform, pushing his cart of supplies through the glass doors of a towering financial building. The lobby gleamed with marble floors, polished steel, and screens flashing stock numbers. But no one looked at him. Executives passed by with lattes in hand, their eyes fixed on their phones, as if David were part of the wallpaper. He mopped, emptied trash cans, and changed light bulbs with steady efficiency, invisible in a world that valued only power and profit. Beneath that uniform, however, was a man who had once designed safety systems as a mechanical engineer. Years earlier, when his wife became ill, he left that career to take care of her and Emma. After she passed away, the bills stacked higher than his degree could cover. He took the job that was available, not the one that fit his resume. Still, he carried the same precision and calm in every task, even if nobody noticed. Across the city, Victoria Hayes began her day in a penthouse suite that overlooked Central Park. At 6:30 a.m. her personal trainer arrived, and by 7 sharp she was already dressed in a tailored suit, scrolling through emails on 3 different devices. At 34, she was the CEO of Hayes Technologies, a company valued in the billions. Her face appeared in magazines, her speeches quoted in financial news. She moved through boardrooms with the same authority her father once had, commanding the attention of investors and politicians alike. Yet behind the flawless hair, the designer heels, and the driver waiting at the curb, there was a quiet emptiness. Her mornings were not filled with small voices, asking for help with math homework or laughter over spilled orange juice. Instead, they were filled with silent elevators and endless schedules. At times, even surrounded by people, she felt entirely alone. Admirers saw power, beauty, and control. They did not see the woman who longed for something genuine in a world that valued her for her name and her fortune. The contrast between their lives could not have been sharper. David scraped together every dollar, stretching his shifts late into the night, sometimes cleaning tables at a diner after finishing at the building. He returned home long after Emma had gone to bed, leaving notes on the counter just to remind her that he loved her. Victoria returned to a suite where assistants had stocked her fridge and organized her files, but where no one waited for her smile. He lived in a world that passed him by without acknowledgement. She lived in a world where every glance was calculated, every handshake strategic. He worked to survive. She worked to dominate. Yet both carried something hidden. David, the resilience and knowledge of a man who refused to break no matter how hard life pressed down. Victoria, the longing for authenticity in a sea of artificial loyalty. Neither of them could imagine that their paths would soon collide. One man overlooked, one woman envied, each carrying a piece of what the other needed. The stage was set, and fate was moving them closer, toward a moment that would challenge everything they thought they knew about worth. love, and destiny. The ballroom glowed under chandeliers that seemed to drip with diamonds. It was the annual Hayes Foundation Charity Gala, a night where the city's wealthiest gathered to toast themselves while pledging donations that would make headlines the next morning. At the center of it all stood Victoria Hayes, flawless in a silver gown, her hair swept back to reveal a face photographers adored. She moved easily among senators, CEOs, and celebrities, her laughter soft, her words measured, every glance reinforcing her reputation as a woman untouchable. Cameras flashed, waiters carried trays of champagne, and an orchestra played from a balcony above the floor. At the far edge of the room, nearly invisible, David Miller pushed a mop bucket across the marble tiles. He wore the same navy uniform as the other janitorial staff, blending into the background. His job was to make sure no glass shards or spilled wine ruined the evening for the elite. He worked quietly, head down, trying not to be noticed. To the guests, he did not exist. But fate has a way of breaking through the walls people build between each other. Victoria's young niece, Lily, only 6 years old, had been trailing after a group of older cousins. Curious and restless, she wandered to the staircase near the back of the hall, a place where guests rarely looked. She tripped on the hem of her dress, a sudden stumble that sent her tiny body forward. In that split second, the glittering night threatened to shatter. David saw it before anyone else. He dropped the mop and sprinted. His boots echoed across the marble, just as Lily lost her footing. He caught her mid-fall, one arm wrapping around her small frame, the other steadying them both against the polished railing. Her cry was muffled against his chest as he crouched to reassure her, whispering soft words that calmed her shaking breath. For a moment, the music and chatter seemed to fade. Victoria turned, her sharp eyes catching the sight of her niece in the arms of a janitor, not a bodyguard in a suit, not one of the men who constantly tried to impress her, but a man no one had bothered to notice all evening. Her heart thudded in her chest, not from fear, but from the realization of what had just happened. Guests gasped. Some craned their necks to see. The orchestra faltered for a beat before regaining its rhythm. David rose slowly, still holding Lily until he was certain she was steady on her feet. He brushed a tear from her cheek, his hands rough, yet gentle. Victoria stepped forward, her heels clicking against the marble, and for the first time in years, she felt words catch in her throat. Gratitude, shock, curiosity, all tangled together. Their eyes met across the space, his, tired and uncertain, as if he did not belong in this glittering world. Hers, wide with the weight of a truth she could not yet name. The silence stretched just long enough to feel heavy. Then Lily slipped her hand into David's, clinging to the man who had saved her. In that simple gesture, the tension broke into something undeniable. Victoria knew then that this night would not be remembered for speeches or donations. It would be remembered as the moment a humble janitor stepped out of the shadows and into her world. The spark had been struck, and nothing would ever be the same. The days after the gala should have faded back into routine, but Victoria Hayes found herself watching the quiet janitor who had saved her niece. She noticed him in the early mornings when her car pulled up to the front of the building. David Miller was always there before the first executives arrived, holding his daughter Emma's hand as he walked her toward a school bus stop. He bent down to tie her shoelace, placed a small lunchbox in her arms, and kissed her on the forehead before hurrying into the service entrance. There was no chauffeur, no polished shoes, no sleek briefcase, just a father making sure his little girl was safe before starting another day of work. Inside the building, David moved with steady rhythm. He polished brass railings, hauled trash, and replaced light bulbs without ever looking frustrated. He greeted the security guards, held doors for delivery men, and even once carried a heavy package for an elderly tenant struggling with her cane. It struck Victoria that he did everything with patience, as if his worth was measured not in recognition, but in the care he put into each simple task. Then one afternoon, the building shuddered with a sudden loss of power. The lights flickered, computers went dark, and voices rose in confusion. Some guests panicked, pressing the elevator buttons in vain. Staff rushed about, unsure of what to do. Victoria, who had just stepped out of a meeting, felt the tension ripple through the air. David appeared in the hallway, his expression calm. While others froze, he headed directly for the maintenance panel. He asked people to step back, his voice firm but steady, and opened the panel with practiced ease. Sparks had jumped from a loose wire, and the system hummed with dangerous energy. Without hesitation, he stripped off his gloves, adjusted the wiring with confident precision, and stabilized the current. Within minutes, the lights hummed back to life. People cheered with relief. Victoria had not moved. She stood in the corner, watching the scene unfold. The janitor she had dismissed as invisible was the one man who had not panicked. His hands moved with certainty, his body steady, his focus unshakable. In that moment, she understood there was more to him than worn shoes and a mop. Beneath the surface was knowledge, discipline, and strength that spoke of a life lived beyond what people assumed. She found herself unsettled. Part of her wanted to walk away, to retreat into the safety of her polished world where people played their roles and no one surprised her. Yet another part of her, stronger and harder to silence, wanted to know him, to understand why a man with that kind of quiet authority had ended up in a uniform no one respected. As the hallway emptied and the building settled, Victoria remained still, her gaze fixed on David. She had spent her life surrounded by power and influence, but in the calm confidence of a janitor, she saw something rare, something real, and it left her with a question she could not yet answer. The second charity gala of the season was even more dazzling than the first. Chandeliers spilled golden light across polished marble floors. Photographers crowded near the velvet ropes, their cameras flashing as limousines pulled up outside. Inside the ballroom, crystal glasses clinked, an orchestra filled the air with music, and gowns shimmered beneath the spotlights. At the center of it all was Victoria Hayes, dressed in midnight blue silk that caught every eye in the room. She moved with the confidence of someone born to command attention, surrounded by politicians and investors who hung on her every word. At the far end of the hall, David Miller worked in silence. He had been assigned to wipe down tables between the rounds of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. His uniform was neat but plain, and he kept his eyes on his work. He wanted no part in the spectacle, no reminder that he didn't belong in this world. To everyone else, he was invisible, but not to her. Victoria's gaze found him across the room, and for a moment, the noise around her faded. The image of him saving Lily still lived in her mind, a scene she could not shake. Tonight, she decided she would no longer pretend indifference. With deliberate steps, she broke from her circle of admirers and walked across the hall. Conversations stuttered. Music faltered. Even the photographers sensed something unusual and shifted their lenses toward her path. Victoria crossed the expanse of the ballroom, each click of her heels echoing louder in David's ears. He froze, cloth still in hand, his heart pounding so hard it hurt. She stopped in front of him, her voice carried through the hall, soft yet commanding. "David, thank you for what you did for my niece." Everyone turned to look. For the first time that night, the powerful CEO addressed a janitor by name. Murmurs spread like wildfire. Who was he? Why was she speaking to him? David's throat tightened. He forced out words that trembled against the weight of the moment. "Please, don't joke with me." Victoria's eyes softened, but her voice was steady, strong enough for everyone to hear. "I'm not joking. For once in my life, I want something real. And that's you." The room gasped. A billionaire CEO, admired and envied, was declaring interest not in a fellow executive, not in some polished suitor, but in the janitor who stood with calloused hands and wide, fearful eyes. David's hands shook. His breath caught. The disbelief on his face clashed with the fire of conviction in hers. Around them, whispers sharpened into judgment, curiosity, outrage. Reporters scribbled, guests exchanged scandalized glances, and cameras flashed as if the world had tilted on its axis. In the center of it all, Tortille. They stood locked in a moment. Neither could escape. She, courageous enough to risk everything for truth. He, too stunned to trust what he had just heard. And together they became the storm that would shake both their worlds. Victoria Hayes did not retreat after the gala. The following days found her stepping out of her polished world and into David Miller's modest neighborhood. She arrived unannounced at the small apartment where he lived with Emma, bringing groceries and a warmth that felt completely out of place against the cracked sidewalks and faded brick buildings. Her high heels clicked sharply on uneven pavement as she climbed the stairs, contrasting with the worn sneakers David wore every day. Inside, she sat at the tiny kitchen table, helping Emma with her math homework, pointing out sums with gentle patience, smiling at every correct answer, and teasing lightly when mistakes were made. David watched from the doorway, hesitant, unsure if he had any right to let her in, any right to accept her presence in his life. Outside, whispers followed them. Neighbors and passers-by stared, some with curiosity, others with cruel smirks. David overheard mutterings about gold diggers and foolish men being seduced by wealth. He felt a weight settle on his chest. Every compliment Victoria gave him, every moment she spent in his humble home, clashed with the chorus of judgment in his mind. He could not shake the idea that he was too broken, too ordinary, too flawed to deserve someone like her. One quiet evening, after Emma had gone to bed, Victoria returned. She carried a small bag of food, simple and thoughtful, and set it on the counter without fanfare. David sat at the worn kitchen table, his head in his hands, and admitted the truth he had been holding for weeks. He could barely look up as he whispered that he could not give her the life she deserved, that he was too broken, and that she would eventually realize she deserved someone whole. Victoria moved closer, taking his hand in both of hers. She held his gaze, unwavering, and spoke gently but firmly. She did not want perfection. She did not want wealth or status. She wanted him. She wanted the way he fought every day for his daughter. The patience, the kindness, the quiet strength that held everything together even when life pressed down hard. She wanted the man who had become more than anyone had noticed, the man who had saved her niece and now held her heart. David's breath caught, tears threatening, but a fragile trust began to grow. The walls he had built around himself, the walls that kept love and hope at bay, started to crack in that small apartment. With the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant sounds of the city outside, a bond began to form, one not of wealth or expectation, but of understanding, admiration, and the slow awakening of love that could survive everything else. The next gala was even more lavish, held in a historic hotel ballroom that glimmered with crystal chandeliers and polished marble floors. Victoria stood at the center of the room, radiant and composed, as influential business figures moved around her, glasses raised in polite conversation. Across the hall, David Miller moved quietly among the staff, keeping an eye on the guests, wiping tables, and making sure the night ran smoothly. The air shifted when Robert Lang, a rival CEO who had once courted Victoria, stepped forward. He leaned into a group of laughing executives and called out so that everyone could hear, mocking David for standing near Victoria. He called him a fraud, a gold digger, a man who did not belong in this world of wealth and power. The room went still. Murmurs spread like wildfire as cameras turned toward David, catching every reaction. Before anyone could respond, a spark ignited near a decorative display, and flames quickly spread along drapes and fabric panels. Alarms blared, but the system failed to operate correctly. Panic erupted. Guests screamed, tripping over chairs and furniture as smoke filled the air. People rushed toward exits, some hesitating as fear froze them in place. David's training and instincts kicked in immediately. He ran to the control panel, assessing the wiring and circuits that were overloading. His hands moved quickly, steady and precise, stabilizing the system long enough to prevent a larger catastrophe. He directed staff and guests toward safe exits, moving with calm authority that contrasted sharply with the chaos around him. Victoria found herself trapped near a set of folding doors that had jammed in the smoke-filled hallway. David arrived within seconds, guiding her out, placing her behind a safety barrier, and checking that Emma, who had been brought earlier by a neighbor, was unharmed. His focus never wavered, even as the flames licked closer to the walls and the heat rose. Robert Lang, faced with real danger, fled immediately, abandoning the pretense of control he had maintained all night. His cowardice was exposed as he tripped in the smoke and stumbled through the exit, leaving guests and reporters to witness the stark difference between his selfish panic and David's fearless action. By the time the fire department arrived, the worst of the danger had been contained. Guests and staff alike were shaken, but safe. Cameras captured David's sooty face, his uniform scorched at the edges, as he helped the last people through the exit. Victoria stood among the crowd, her eyes wide with admiration and relief. Everyone present saw it. Then David Miller was not just a janitor. He was a hero, defined not by money or status, but by courage, intelligence, and selfless action. In that moment, the room understood who he truly was, and the world outside would never view him the same way again. The room was still buzzing from the chaos of the fire and the shocking revelation of Robert Lang's cowardice. Cameras had captured every moment, and the city would soon see the story unfold in every news outlet. Victoria Hayes stepped forward, moving past the whispers and curious glances of the reporters and guests. She took David Miller's hand in hers, the gesture simple, yet profound. The sparkle of her engagement ring and the shimmer of her gown were irrelevant now. Her focus was entirely on him and Emma. David felt the weight of every eye in the room, the cameras, the crowd, the judgment that had followed him for years. For a moment he froze, unsure if he could truly accept what was happening. He had spent so long believing that love was reserved for the perfect, for the wealthy, for the untouchable. Now a woman he had once thought unreachable was declaring, openly and proudly, that he and his daughter were her family. Emma, who had been shy and quiet during the commotion, stepped forward. Her small hand slipped into Victoria's, and she looked up with wide, trusting eyes. In the softest voice, full of innocence and joy, she called Victoria Mom for the very first time. The room seemed to hold its breath. The word, simple yet powerful, sealed the bond between the three of them. There was laughter and tears, gasps and quiet murmurs as guests witnessed a family being formed in front of their eyes. David squeezed Victoria's hand, and something shifted inside him. The doubts, the fears, the years of believing himself unworthy, all of it melted away. He saw a future that was bright and full of hope, no longer invisible. He would walk with pride, not because of wealth or status, but because of the love and respect that now surrounded him. Victoria, too, had found something she had longed for her entire life: authenticity, connection, and a family she could cherish beyond the spotlight. The three of them stood together, the noise of the ballroom fading behind them. Cameras flashed, guests whispered, but it all seemed secondary to the quiet, profound truth of what had been built in that moment. They were a family, bound not by fortune or expectation, but by courage, devotion, and love that had survived every challenge. In the months that followed, David and Victoria navigated their lives with Emma at the center. Mornings began with laughter over breakfast. Afternoons filled with school projects and gentle guidance. Evenings with quiet talks and shared stories. The city outside could gossip, could judge, but within their home, there was only warmth, security, and the steady knowledge that they were enough for each other. And so, the story of a janitor and a CEO became something more than headlines. It was a testament to the truth that worth is measured not by wealth or power, but by the courage to love and to be loved. In each other, David, Victoria, and Emma had found the greatest treasure, one that no fire, no rumor, and no expectation could ever take away.